What's the question?
How does water? I know where we were.
Yeah.
How does water typically get into a fuel tank?
So there are three general ways that water gets into fuel tanks. One is condensation, and that's going to happen to all tanks because of ambient temperature fluctuations. You're always going to have some condensation that builds up on the sidewall of the tank, and what happens is it ends up rolling down the side and accumulates on the bottom. The next way that water gets into tanks is either through stormwater or groundwater, if the tank's not tight. So in the ground, over time, those tanks, like underground storage tanks, they'll settle and shift a little bit. Maybe the vent pipes will shift. Those could be points of water intrusion during like rain events. And we've seen tanks they didn't have vent caps on there. Sometimes delivery drivers forget to put the fill caps back on the right way. Gaskets on those caps crack, and so stormwater runoff can go and get into the sumps and enter the tank that way. Usually that's a decent amount of water pretty quick, and so you might get slow flow or pumps shutting down.
So, and how does Fuel Guard fix phase separation?
Well, there's one more way that water gets into tanks.
That's swell.
So,
okay.
What's that? Did you say that's swell?
Yeah, that's swell. That is swell.
Oh, Jesus, it gets worse.
Yeah.
You can also get bad loads, and that happens every now and then. Mm-hmm. So,
I'm sorry. All right. There is another way that
my
water...
My name's Corey Agnew. Today I'd like to talk about bad loads.
Yeah. All right.
So what happens is...
A bad delivery. There you go.
The third way that water gets into tanks is bad deliveries.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen because water from either the pipeline or terminal, the bottom of a tank, somewhere down the supply chain line gets into a delivery truck and they drop it in a tank.
Okay. And so then now, before I was interrupted, how does Fuel Guard fix phase separation?
So when we go to, you want step by step?
No.
Okay.
Overview.
We remove the water from the fuel, and we make sure that the octane and ethanol percentages are right before we leave it. So what we do is when we go to at a phase separation tank, the station's shut down. They're not going to be pumping that fuel at all. So we got to dispatch a couple technicians. They'll arrive there with we have mobile filtering equipment which can strip the particulate and water out of the fuel. So we arrive with our equipment. The technicians open up the tank. So they'll open up the fill, pull the drop tube, they'll open up the probe, pull that out, they'll pull the STP as well, because we want to have access to all ends of the tank. Then they'll sample the tank, they'll get a Vita root reading, and they'll stick the tank with water detecting paste. We kind of use those three measurements. They all give us a little bit different information. Each has its own advantage and disadvantage. But it gives us a good story of how much, like what we're dealing with, how bad the contamination is. Then what we typically start off with to clean the fuel is we will start with a bottom sweep. You want to get the large amount of accumulated water and ethanol that's dropped out of the fuel. Most of the time when we're dealing with phase separation, the entire tank is phase separated. But if you let it sit long enough, and this doesn't happen that often, but sometimes people have a station where they haven't sold for a while, and so they just shut the tank. Maybe it's a premium tank, they don't sell much. They'll shut it down. Mm-hmm. You can let that tank settle for a week or 2 weeks, and eventually all the water's going to drop to the bottom. What we do on site for filtering is we kind of force the water out of the fuel. So you could either let it sit for 2 weeks, but nobody really does that because then you're shut down for 2 weeks. But in that case, if you let it settle, the water and all the ethanol is going to end up being on the bottom of the tank. You'll have perfectly clear fuel, but then you'll have a layer of water in like orangish ethanol, which is a weird color. What happens in that instance when all the ethanol drops out? The octane rating lowers. So you have maybe like your 87 product drops down to like 85 or 84 at that point. So what you need to do is you need to test the octane to then figure out how to blend a higher premium product to bring the octane back up.
Okay, so on the Fuel Guard website.
Jesus, that's a long-winded answer for. There's a lot more to it too.
Oh.
That's not even all of it. I mean, sorry. So getting back to how we fix phase, because
That was the original
yeah.
question.
Once we sample and know the amount of contamination that we're dealing with, we're gonna pull the water off the bottom. Once that's done, we will cycle through coalescers and water absorbing filters. We pull from one end of the tank, it goes through those filters, discharges into the other end of the tank. And keep it going over and over, rinse and repeat until all the water's stripped out.
Okay.
Sometimes, in some instances, we'll use chemical additives to help.
Do we want to do like a 60 minutes sort of thing where like it cuts to me every now and then doing like a
Taking notes. Yeah.
you know like that I mean, it'd be funny, right? I mean,
yeah.
just
And you could do it in like a different room.
Yeah.
Like clearly. Yes. Oh, I see. Fuel. Huh.
okay. So, all right, back to seriousness. If we
Sorry.
on the Fuel Guard website, let me revert. On the Fuel Guard website, it says that you guys offer free fuel analysis, free fueling, free fuel analysis.
Mm-hmm.
What does that consist of?
So we'll send a technician out to do a visual assessment of your tank, the outside condition of your tank, then to stick your tank with water detecting paste, collect a tank bottom sample, and just get a good understanding of the condition of the fuel on the bottom of the tank. That's like first and foremost, that's where your problems are going to start, and that's where the contamination lies. So you want to get a tank bottom sample. From there, you start with the visual assessment. If it's not clean, clear, and bright, you gotta. If it's not clean, clear, and bright, you've got a contamination issue, either water or sludge or a combination.
Okay. What would you say? What separates Fuel Guard from the competitors, from the competition?
So we have a really good advantage in our market because we have petroleum technicians on staff. We're not just guys who know how to run pumps and filters. Our technicians are certified. They're certified through Veeder-Root and dispensers, and we have the whole Guardian service arm. Fuel Guard is a division of Guardian. So the technicians that do the Fuel Guard work are also fully trained Guardian service technicians. So when you have an issue with your fuel, we can go out there and clean it, but we can also replace the STP, blow lines back, replace eco meters, assess the systems, assess the components that have been damaged, replace those. There are a lot of other companies that will just do, some competitors just do like a bottom sweep, and they only deal with the fuel and not necessarily all the other problems. And so then in that instance, you've got to deal with, if you're a tank owner, you've got to deal with multiple contractors. Mm-hmm. And then if you have an issue, you've got to deal with multiple contractors pointing fingers at each other of who caused what issue. So there's a convenience factor, but there's also just a technical knowledge factor where we can do more.
Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. Now